June 19, 1944, about 1,000 Philippine Sea. The glowing phosphor of the radar screens aboard the USS Lexington paints a picture of imminent violence. For hours, the operators in the Combat Information Center have been straining their eyes against the green sweep of the scope, waiting for the inevitable. Now, the waiting is over. A massive cluster of contacts appears at a range of 150 miles, inbound from the west. It is the first heavy wave of Japanese naval aviation, the tip of the spear of the Imperial Japanese Navy's first mobile fleet. On the flag bridge, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding Task Force 58, receives the report with the calm demeanor of a man holding a winning hand. He orders his carriers to turn into the wind. The flight decks of 15 American aircraft carriers, a floating armada of unprecedented power, erupt into organized chaos. Engines cough into life, propellers blur into shimmering disks, and the F-6F Hellcats, the Navy's premier dogfighters, begin to roar down the timber planks. This moment, this collision of steel and high explosives in the skies above the Marianas, is the culmination of a strategic gamble made in the dark hours of the previous night. To understand the slaughter that is about to unfold, one must look not at the pilots climbing into their cockpits, but at the quiet, cerebral man commanding the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. Spruance is not an aviator. He is a battleship sailor, a man of gunnery and surface tactics, thrust into command of the world's largest carrier force. His primary mission, dictated by the Pacific Strategy, is not hunting the enemy fleet, but the protection of the amphibious invasion force currently fighting for its life on the beaches of Saipan. The Marines landed on June 15, and their toehold in the Marianas is the knife at Japan's throat. The Japanese response, Operation Ago, is a desperate, all-in bid to sever that supply line and crush the American fleet. Just 12 hours prior, shortly before midnight on June 18, Spruance stood at a crossroads that would define his legacy. Intelligence reports, gleaned from high-frequency direction finding and submarine contacts, placed the Japanese fleet approximately 350 miles to the west-southwest. His aggressive subordinates, men like Vice Admiral Mitcher and the vocal naval aviators back in Pearl Harbor, wanted to turn the fleet loose. They wanted to steam west at flank speed, close the distance under the cover of darkness, and launch a dawn strike to annihilate the Japanese carriers. But Spruance hesitated. He looked at the map and saw the ghosts of battles past. He knew the Japanese penchant for complex, multi-pronged attacks, the end run. If he sent Task Force 58 charging west into the open ocean, he risked leaving the transport ships and the Marines on Saipan exposed to a flanking maneuver by a second Japanese force slipping past him in the night. The primary mission is the capture of Saipan, Spruance reasoned. In the silence of the flag plot, he made the controversial decision to play goalkeeper rather than striker. He ordered the fleet to hold its ground, keeping the carriers tethered to the invasion beaches. He would let the Japanese come to him. He would absorb their blow with the thickest shield ever forged in naval history. Now, as the morning sun climbs over the Philippine Sea, Spruance's caution is about to be tested against the full fury of Vice Admiral Gisaburo Ozawa's carrier planes. The odds, however, are not what they were at Midway or the Coral Sea. The balance of power has shifted tectonically. Task Force 58 fields nearly 900 aircraft against Ozawa's 450 carrier planes and perhaps 300 land-based aircraft. But numbers tell only half the story. The American pilots are well-trained, flying the rugged, heavy-hitting Hellcat. The Japanese pilots are green, rushed through training to replace the veterans lost in the Solomons flying aircraft that have failed to evolve with the war. As the first wave of Japanese attackers closes to within 70 miles, the technological disparity becomes lethal. The American ships are equipped with advanced air search radar, allowing fighter director officers to vector the combat air patrol, the CAP, to the exact altitude and bearing of the incoming raids. The Japanese are not sneaking up on anyone. They are flying into a trap that has been set with mathematical precision. The intercept begins. Hellcats dive from high altitude, their .50 caliber machine guns tearing into the formations of lightly armored Zeros and Judy dive bombers. It is less a dogfight and more an execution. The Japanese formations crumble. Burning aircraft tumble into the sea in such numbers that the ocean surface is scarred with smoking pyres. But the destruction of the Japanese naval air arm is not limited to the skies. While Spruance and Mitcher manage the air battle, a silent underwater war has already drawn first blood, unbeknownst to the pilots fighting overhead. Earlier that morning at 8:10, the submarine USS Albacore, a Gato-class boat patrolling the likely approach routes, achieved a firing solution on a massive target. Through the periscope, the silhouette was unmistakable, the IJN Tahoe. This was no ordinary ship. The Tahoe was the newest, most heavily armored carrier in the Japanese inventory, the pride of the fleet and Admiral Ozawa's personal flagship. She was on her maiden combat voyage. The Albacore fired a spread of torpedoes. On the bridge of the Tahoe, a sharp-eyed warrant officer spotted the wakes. In a display of suicidal bravery, a Japanese pilot, having just launched, dived his plane into one of the torpedoes to detonate it prematurely. But he could not stop them all. One torpedo slammed into the Tahoe's starboard side. The explosion jammed the forward elevator and ruptured aviation fuel tanks. To the Japanese damage control teams, the hit seemed survivable. The ship maintained speed. The fires appeared contained. But inside the hull, a lethal cocktail of volatile, unrefined fuel from Borneo was leaking, vaporizing into the hangar decks. The Tahoe was becoming a floating bomb, though her crew and Admiral Ozawa continued to fight the battle, unaware that their flagship was already doomed by a single American fish. Back in the skies over Task Force 58, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot is reaching its crescendo. It is a slaughter so absolute, so one-sided, that a pilot from the USS Lexington, landing his Hellcat with a grin that threatens to split his face, remarks to his crew chief, "Why, hell, it was just like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The phrase sticks. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot becomes the epitaph for the Imperial Japanese Navy's air power. But the moniker, while colorful, risks masking the deadly efficiency of the American machine. This is not merely a triumph of pilot skill, it is a triumph of systems. The Japanese waves, 4 in total, are dismantled by a layered defense that functions like a mechanized thresher. When the Zeros and Judys manage to slip past the Hellcats of the Combat Air Patrol, they run into a wall of steel thrown up by the battleships and cruisers screening the carriers. Here, another secret weapon comes into play, the VT proximity fuse. Unlike traditional anti-aircraft shells that must hit a target or be timed to explode at a specific altitude, these shells contain a tiny radio transceiver. They sense the presence of the enemy plane and detonate when they are close enough to kill. The sky over Task Force 58 becomes a lethal grid of shrapnel that shreds the fragile Japanese airframes. In the midst of this aerial meat grinder, individual acts of prowess stand out. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, leading a division from the USS Essex, finds himself and his wingman, Ensign Roy Rushing, facing a swarm of enemy fighters. McCampbell does not panic. He flies with the cold precision of a surgeon conserving ammunition, picking his shots. In a single sortie, he blasts 7 Japanese aircraft out of the sky, a record that stands as a testament to the dominance of the Hellcat over the Zero. By the time the sun begins its descent, the Japanese have lost nearly 300 carrier aircraft. The Americans have lost less than 30. Yet while the sky belongs to the aviators, the depths belong to the silent service. The crippling of the Tahoe earlier that morning was only the first stroke of the submarine force. As the air battle rages toward noon, another predator is stalking the Japanese fleet. The USS Cavella, a Gato-class submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kostler, is patrolling the waters near the Tahoe's position. Kostler is not hunting stragglers, he is hunting royalty. Through his periscope, he spots the unmistakable profile of the Shikaku. The Shikaku is a legend. She is a veteran of Pearl Harbor, the Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz. She has survived battles that sent her sister ships to the bottom, earning a reputation as a lucky ship. But luck in war is a finite resource. At 11:18, Kostler fires a spread of 6 torpedoes. The range is close, barely 1,000 yards. The Japanese destroyers are alert, but they are too late. At approximately 12:20, the luck of the Shikaku runs out. 3, perhaps 4, torpedoes slam into her flank. The impact is catastrophic. The warheads tear open the forward aviation fuel tanks, and unlike the American carriers, which have sophisticated purging systems, the Shikaku's mains rupture, spewing volatile gas throughout the ship. Fires ignite instantly. The lucky carrier begins to settle by the bow, her hangars turning into infernos. Ammunition cooks off, convulsing the ship with secondary explosions. By 14:08, the great veteran of the Kaido Butai rolls over and slides beneath the waves, taking 1,263 men with her. Meanwhile, aboard the crippled flagship Teiho, the situation is deteriorating with agonizing slowness. The single torpedo hit from the albacore that morning had seemed manageable. The ship was still making 26 knots, but the damage control officer, in a fatal error of judgment, ordered the ship's ventilation system to run at full capacity, hoping to clear the fumes from the ruptured crude oil tanks. Instead, the fans pumped the explosive vapor into every compartment of the ship. The Teiho, the most heavily armored carrier Japan ever built, has become a pressurized fuel-air bomb. At 15:30, a spark, perhaps from a generator, perhaps from a hammer striking steel, ignites the mixture. The resulting explosion is not just a detonation, it is an upheaval. The flight deck, plated with heavy armor, heaves upward. The sides of the hangar deck blow out. Admiral Ozawa, stunned and reluctant, is forced to transfer his flag to a destroyer. Shortly after he departs, the Teiho, the hope of the Imperial Navy, capsizes and sinks, taking 1,650 crewmen and 13 aircraft to the bottom. By the evening of June 19, the first Mobile fleet has been gutted. 2 fleet carriers are gone. The air groups are annihilated. Admiral Spruance's defensive gamble has paid off in blood. He has shattered the enemy's offensive power without exposing the Saipan invasion force to a single hit. But Spruance is not done. With the air threat neutralized, the electric brain, as his staff calls him, finally releases the leash. He orders Task Force 58 to turn west. The chase is on. The pursuit lasts through the night and into the next day, June 20. The Americans are steaming at high speed, trying to close the gap on the retreating Japanese. But the enemy has a head start. It is not until late afternoon that search planes finally locate Ozawa's surviving ships. The report places them at extreme range, nearly 275 miles away. Vice Admiral Mitcher faces a dilemma that would paralyze a lesser commander. To launch a strike now, with sunset approaching, means the pilots will have to fly to the limit of their fuel range, attack, and then return to their carriers in total darkness. Naval aviators are trained for many things, but night landings on a pitching deck with fuel gauges reading empty are a recipe for disaster. A strike now guarantees losses, not from enemy fire, but from the unforgiving physics of flight. Mitcher looks at the chart. He knows this is the chance to finish the job. "Launch 'em," he orders. At 16:10, the flight decks roar to life again. 216 aircraft, Hellcats, Heldovers, and Avengers claw their way into the twilight sky. They form up and head west, chasing the dying sun. This is the mission beyond darkness. They find the Japanese fleet just as the light is failing. The enemy is in disarray, refueling ships scattered. The American pilots, conscious of their dwindling fuel, attack with ferocious speed. They single out the carrier Hio. Avengers drop their torpedoes while Heldovers scream down from the zenith. The Hio is bracketed. Torpedoes strike home and bombs shatter her superstructure. She is left burning and dead in the water, eventually sinking into the Philippine Sea. The rest of the strike force pummels the remaining carriers, Zuikaku and Chiyoda, and the battleship Haruna, leaving them damaged and smoking. But the real battle for the American aviators is just beginning. As the last bombs fall and the surviving Japanese ships scatter into the gloom, the pilots of Task Force 58 turn their aircraft back toward the east. They are 275 miles from home. The sun has vanished beneath the horizon, taking with it the visual references essential for navigation over open water. The Pacific Ocean at night is a void, a black abyss where the sea and sky merge into an indistinguishable curtain of darkness. Inside the cockpits of the Hellcats, Avengers, and Helldivers, the glow of the instrument panels illuminates the faces of men doing grim mental arithmetic. Fuel gauges are tapping the empty pegs. Engines are leaned out to the absolute limit to conserve every drop of avgas. The formation discipline that characterized the outbound flight begins to fray. It is no longer a coordinated strike force. It is a loose collection of desperate men racing against time and physics. They are flying on fumes, and the carriers are nowhere in sight. Back on the flag bridge of the USS Lexington, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher stares into the blackness. He knows exactly what is happening. He knows that hundreds of his boys are out there, alone in the dark, searching for a needle in a haystack. By naval regulation, the fleet must remain blacked out. A lit ship is a dead ship, a beacon for enemy submarines that might be lurking in the area. Standard operating procedure dictates that the fleet remains invisible, even if it means losing aircraft that cannot find the deck. It is the cold calculus of war. Sacrifice the few to protect the many. But Mitcher is an aviator's admiral. He wears a baseball cap instead of a gold-braided cover, and he knows the terror of a dry tank over water. At approximately 2200 hours, he makes a decision that defies doctrine and defines his command. He turns to his chief of staff, Captain Arleigh Burke, and gives the order, "Turn on the lights." The command ripples through the task force. Suddenly, the Philippine Sea is ablaze. It is a spectacle never before seen in naval warfare. The carriers switch on their truck lights, outlining the flight decks. Searchlights, usually reserved for spotting enemy bombers, beam straight up into the heavens, creating pillars of light that can be seen for miles. Destroyers fire star shells, hanging magnesium flares in the sky to guide the stragglers home. To a submarine commander, it would look like a carnival. To the pilots, it looks like salvation. The recovery that follows is a scene of organized bedlam. The air around Task Force 58 is thick with desperate aircraft. There is no time for standard landing patterns or identifying codes. The landing signal officers, the LSOs, wave their paddles at anything with a hook. Hellcats from the Hornet land on the Bunker Hill. Avengers from the Yorktown trap aboard the Enterprise. It doesn't matter whose deck it is. Any flat surface will do. On the fantail of the USS Wasp, the LSO fights to bring in a damaged Helldiver. The plane is erratic, its engine sputtering, the pilot fighting exhaustion. He comes in too high, cuts the throttle, and slams onto the deck, bouncing over the arresting wires and smashing into the barrier. The crash crews are on it in seconds, pulling the crew from the wreckage before the fuel ignites. They shove the crumpled aircraft over the side into the sea to clear the deck for the next plane, which is already on final approach, blinking its landing lights in a frantic Morse code of distress. Not everyone makes it. The radio channels are filled with the calm, resigned voices of men announcing they are ditching. "Out of gas, going in," crackles a voice over the TBS frequency. Then silence. Throughout the fleet, destroyers break formation, acting as sheepdogs, rushing to the coordinates of splashed aircraft to fish wet, oil-soaked pilots out of the swells. By the time the last engine is cut, the cost of the mission beyond darkness becomes clear. 80 aircraft have been lost, crashed on deck, or ditched in the sea. It is a heavy price, heavier than the combat losses of the previous day. But thanks to the lights and the aggressive rescue efforts, the human toll is mitigated. Most of the crews are pulled from the water alive. As dawn breaks on June 21, the adrenaline fades, replaced by the dull ache of fatigue. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is effectively over. Admiral Spruance, ever the prudent strategist, evaluates the situation. His destroyers are low on fuel. His aviators are physically and mentally spent. The Japanese fleet, though mauled, is retreating west at high speed, putting distance between themselves and the American carriers. Spruance faces pressure from his aggressive commanders, particularly the fiery Admiral Jocko Clark, to pursue and finish the destruction. They want to chase the Japanese all the way to the home islands if necessary, but Spruance looks at the map. His primary charge remains the protection of the Saipan invasion force. If he chases Ozawa too far west, he leaves the transports vulnerable to land-based air attacks or a flanking maneuver. He has sunk 3 carriers, Teiho, Shikaku, and Hiyo, and destroyed nearly 600 enemy aircraft. The Japanese carrier force has been eviscerated. It is a decisive victory, achieved with a lopsided kill ratio that defies belief. Spruance decides that the risk of a deep pursuit outweighs the potential gain. He orders the fleet to turn back east, toward the Marianas. The criticism of Spruance's caution will begin almost immediately. In the wardrooms of the carriers and later in the halls of the Pentagon, aviators will argue that Spruance missed the opportunity of the war, a chance of a lifetime to wipe out the entire Imperial Japanese Navy. They will say that a Halsey or a Mitcher would have thrown the rulebook away and chased the enemy into their own harbors. They will argue that by tethering the fleet to the beachhead, Spruance allowed the Japanese battleships and cruisers to escape to fight another day at Leyte Gulf. Yet history offers a different verdict. Spruance's mission was not to hunt glory, it was to secure Saipan. In that, he succeeded absolute. The Japanese Operation Ago was a total failure. They failed to halt the invasion, and they spent their naval air power in a futile attempt to break the American shield. The loss of the Teiho and Shikaku, coupled with the massacre of their air groups, breaks the back of the Imperial Navy's aviation capability. They will build more carriers before the war ends, the massive Shinano, the Unryu class, but they will never again have the pilots to fly from them. The veteran cadre that trained the men who attacked Pearl Harbor is gone, lost in the flames of their ships or the cold waters of the Pacific. From this day forward, the Japanese carriers will be nothing more than decoys, hollow shells without the stinging power of their air wings. The numbers tell the story of a shifting world order. In 2 days of fighting, the United States Navy lost 123 aircraft and 109 men. The Japanese lost 3 carriers, 2 oilers, and thousands of sailors and airmen. But the most telling statistic is the silence in the skies. For the remainder of the war, the U.S. Navy will roam the Pacific with impunity, its carrier decks teeming with aircraft, its pilots confident in their machines and their tactics. On the island of Saipan, the Marines continue their bloody work, grinding through the limestone ridges and caves, but they do so with the knowledge that the sea, behind them, is secure. The nightmare scenario for any amphibious operation, being cut off from supply and support by an enemy fleet, has been erased from the calculus of the Marianas campaign. The horizon, once a source of anxious scanning for the silhouettes of Japanese battleships, is now the exclusive domain of the United States Navy. Admiral Spruance's controversial prudence has ensured that the thousands of Marines clawing their way up Mount Tapachau on Saipan will not face the guns of the Imperial fleet at their backs. The logistics chain remains unbroken. The flow of ammunition, blood plasma, and water continues uninterrupted, as task is theirs. The threat of the Imperial Japanese Navy interfering with the landings has been neutralized, not by a roll of the dice, but by a systematic dismantling of enemy capability. On the flag bridge of the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis, Admiral Raymond Spruance stands at the center of a quiet storm. The physical battle is over, but the debate over his command decisions is only just beginning. To his left and right, staff officers and aviators are already murmuring the critiques that will echo in naval war colleges for decades. They look at the charts and see the empty ocean to the west where a crippled enemy is limping away. They see the surviving Japanese carriers, Zuikaku, Junyō, Ryuho, escaping the noose. To the aggressive mindset of the naval aviator, trained to seek out and destroy the enemy main body, Spruance's turn to the east feels like a fumble on the 1-yard line. They argue that he had the chance of a lifetime to annihilate the entire Japanese fleet, to replicate the decisive finality of Tsushima or Trafalgar. But Spruance is not Nelson, and he is not Halsey. He is a man of cold logic who views war not as a series of duels, but as a complex equation of risk and objective. His orders from Admiral Nimitz were explicit: capture, occupy, and defend Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The destruction of the enemy fleet was secondary to the protection of the amphibious forces. Spruance knows that the Japanese have a history of dividing their forces, using decoys to lure American carriers away, while a second strike force circles back to hammer the vulnerable transports. He remembers the confusion at Midway. He knows the cost of being out of position. If he had raced west into the dark on the night of the 18th, or if he continued the pursuit now beyond the range of air cover for the beachhead, he would be gambling with the lives of 70,000 Marines and soldiers on the shore. Spruance calculates the trade-off. He has traded the possibility of sinking a few more damaged hulls for the certainty of the invasion's success. He has kept the shield locked in place, and as the intelligence reports filter in, the magnitude of what has been accomplished within that defensive posture becomes staggering. The numbers that cross Spruance's desk tell a story of industrial and tactical slaughter. The Japanese First Mobile Fleet has not just been defeated, it has been defanged. The three carriers at the bottom of the trench Taiho, Shikaku, and Hiyo represent nearly a third of the enemy's flight deck tonnage. But ships can be replaced, steel can be bent and welded. What cannot be replaced are the men. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot has wiped out the last generation of competent Japanese naval aviators. Of the 373 aircraft that launched from Ozawa's carriers on the morning of June 19, only 130 returned. When combined with the losses of land-based planes from Guam and the attrition of the retreat, the Japanese have lost nearly 600 aircraft and their crews in less than 48 hours. This is the death knell of the Imperial Japanese Navy as an offensive force. The pilots who died in the Philippine Sea were the replacements for those lost at Midway and the Solomons. They were the product of a training system already strained to the breaking point. Now, they are gone. The survivors are a handful of terrified ensigns with barely enough flight hours to take off and land, let alone dogfight against the combat-hardened veterans of Task Force 58. Spruance understands what his critics do not. He hasn't just won a battle, he has effectively ended the carrier war. From this point on, the Japanese carriers will be nothing more than floating runways without aircraft, hollow vessels that will eventually be used as sacrificial pawns to lure the Americans away from the real target at Leyte Gulf. The lopsided nature of the victory, the Turkey Shoot, is not merely a result of Spruance's caution or Japanese incompetence. It is the dividend of a technological revolution that has quietly transformed the U.S. Navy since the dark days of 1942. The battle proved that the era of the close-range dogfight is ending, replaced by a system of integrated warfare. Throughout the engagement, the American advantage was invisible but overwhelming. It lived in the Combat Information Centers, CIC, of the American ships, where radar plotters tracked enemy raids at ranges of 150 miles, allowing fighter directors to vector Hellcats into perfect intercept positions long before the Japanese pilots ever saw the fleet. It lived in the wings of the F-6F Hellcat, a rugged, high-performance machine that outclassed the fragile Zero in speed, armor, and firepower, and it lived in the magazines of the anti-aircraft guns. For the first time in a major fleet engagement, the U.S. Navy unleashed the VT proximity fuse, a top-secret innovation that allowed shells to detonate when they sensed a target nearby, eliminating the need for a direct hit. This deadly technology created an impenetrable wall of flak that shredded the few Japanese aircraft managing to slip past the fighter screen. Ultimately, this technological dominance vindicated Spruance's caution, resulting in a victory so absolute that it broke the back of Japanese naval aviation forever. If you would like more war stories from World War II, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.